Across the other side of the studio now to have a word with Solange Mougin. She's here to take us through what's grabbing headlines in the press. Solange, you're starting with what we know about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and also what we don't know. Volodymyr Zelensky, he gives nearly daily briefings about the situation on the ground. But even with all of these updates, the New York Times explains that American intelligence services, who've long been focused on adversaries like Russia, well, they're pretty much in the dark in regard to its ally Kyiv and its classified military strategy. And this, the paper says, could hamper any way to hone arms shipments, which are directly needed for another intelligence report coming from Ukraine says that the situation in the east is pretty dire. As The Independent tells us in an exclusive, the report says Ukrainian soldiers are outgunned 20-1 in artillery and 40-1 in ammunition. If weapons are lacking, well, communications, well, they aren't as much, according to Politico.eu. It has an extensive article about Ukrainian soldiers and how they're relying on Starlink, Elon Musk's SpaceX satellite service, to reach their superiors, to communicate with family, but also as well to coordinate the dropping of bombs. Starlink's trial by fire success in Ukraine has, according to the site, whet the appetites of Western militaries.
Now, researching Brazil's environmental conservation efforts, or lack thereof, in the Amazon was the mission of a British journalist and a Brazilian activist who've gone missing.
Yeah, the Guardian's editorial board slams the Brazilian government today for its lackluster search for them. It is not, the paper says, just about their missing and feared dead journalist, but also and the indigenous activist that was with him, but also, more importantly, about President Bolsonaro's trampling of human rights, rule of law, and the deforestation of the Amazon. And in this vein, Le Temps, the Swiss paper, also criticizes the far-right leader, quoting him as brushing off the men's disappearance by saying, quote, "Two people alone in a boat in a wild area, it's not a recommended place for an adventure," end quote.
Now, here in France, we are, of course, just 3 days from the first round of legislative elections.
Yeah, and the conservative paper Le Figaro is headlining today with concern about the right party Les Républicains, saying it is fighting this coming Sunday for its survival. And in its editorial, Le Figaro says, quote, "There's no leader, no policy, no vision," end quote. Despite millions, it says, looking to the right for looking for a right-leaning opposition party. But the majority, too, is also worried about this Sunday amidst polling increases of the union of left parties. Les Echos tells us that while visiting Seine-Saint-Denis department yesterday, Emmanuel Macron stepped up his attacks on Jean-Luc Mélenchon and underlined the differences between his party and the left-leaning ones.
Moving to the art world, Solange, and the theft and trafficking of ancient artifacts.
Yeah, and as we can see on the front page of Libération, Mummies at all costs, it says, in continuing its investigation of illicit purchases of artifacts. It is focusing on how the French Museum Agency, or AFM, was a part of what Libé calls a staggering scheme for getting art for the Louvre Abu Dhabi. The agency became, it says, as a fraud report showed, a formidable tool in art trafficking. And such art trades aren't necessarily victimless crimes, says the Middle East Eye. The site explains that the Clooney Foundation for Justice, it tracked hundreds of cases in war-torn countries in the Middle East where pillaged artifacts not only stripped these nations of their cultural heritage, but also funded and are continuing to fund, in some cases, terrorism as well.
Finally then, Solange, you found some articles about pushing your limits.
Yeah, and the importance of continuing to literally move forward despite all the obstacles. The Guardian tells us of an Italian woman who's just renewed her license at the incredible age of 100 after a medical exam allowed her to do so. And she said her eyesight is good enough to read the newspaper without glasses, which is an amazing feat at her age, a longevity she attributes to another form of motion, long walks with friends. And it is a fast walk, or rather, I should say, a tumble that got this past weekend 21-year-old Abby Lamp to the bottom of Cooper's Hill. Sports Illustrated tells us about how, for the first time, an American has won the wonderfully crazy and zany cheese roll race, where the goal is to throw yourself down an incredibly steep hill. It is a tradition that dates back centuries, and if you haven't seen it, it is definitely worth a watch online. It's a crazy feat of craziness. It just they race down the hill, tumble. It's actually quite dangerous. Worth a watch.
But worth a watch. A cheesy end to our press review.
Yes.
Solange Moujon, thank you for that. Do stay with us here at France 24. We'll be right back.